Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to CxO Global Forum's show on health tech, Health is Wealth. CxO Global Forum is Pakistan's largest C-level forum connecting some of the best and brightest professionals under one roof. In this session, we have with us a very enterprising individual by the name of Nuaman, Tyyeb, based in the United States. He made a name for himself in the healthcare tech space, working on his own project, a specialty pharmacy by the name of CareMed, which he later sold, and is now also involved in an interesting niche within pharmacy tech. Welcome to the show, Nuaman. How do you do?
Well, thank you very much, Bilal. Good evening, everyone in Pakistan. It's 10 o'clock here in the United States, or Miami time, and I'm doing very well. And thank you very much for having me. And I'm excited.
That's wonderful to know. So, I have known you for some time, and I do see you as a bit of an inspiration, as do a lot of Pakistanis when they see people from our own country getting settled abroad very well, making a name for themselves, and working on projects that actually create a huge impact. So, I'd like you to just candidly tell us a little bit about yourself, about your roots, where you grew up, and what inspired you to get into technology to begin with.
Sure. I'm a child of immigrants from Pakistan. My parents both Pakistani. I came to America at the age of 3. Basically, did my education here. Went to Stony Brook University, and in college, I was inspired by technology in general, and I had a telecommunications company. And basically, after I graduated, I was always looking for something, and the area of telecom was becoming saturated. So I was looking for other opportunities and came across the world of specialty pharmaceuticals, and I got involved. And quickly and early on, I saw a lot of needs that the market had. One thing is that the specialty pharmaceutical was an evolving space at the time, and this was back in 2006. You didn't see, and the problem with specialty pharmacy or running, having specialty therapeutics out there, it's very costly in nature. You'll see, like in the United States, the drug spend is over $1 trillion a year, and one of these drugs in cancer, could go for about $25,000 a month. And at the time, the way the system in the United States is set up with the insurance and the PBMs and the pharma, it's a very complex system. And we were basically linked up with the PBM companies, and the one thing we had going for us was we were able to provide the medications to the patients the same day, work with the doctors in the area. And this was in Long Island, New York. So we had access to all the major institutional hospitals like Winthrop, Memorial Sloan Kettering, North Shore, LIJ. And this was in the Long Island region where, we have about 5 million 5 million population. And, just to manage that kind of spend and access and the niche services was important, and I think that was my base, and we grew from there. And I think the one thing that helped me grow was definitely having scalability by deploying the right technology in place. And we use some off-the-shelf systems, but then we also kind of developed our own technology on top of these mainstream systems for processing claims, for adjudication, reconciliation. And then on top of everything there's not much margin in the business. You're doing $1 million in processing, but you're only working with a few points. So the biggest thing is, how do you keep everything organized, and how do you keep it transparent, and how do you keep the growth going? So I definitely think the use of technology, the use of systems helped us achieve things like adherence, disease management, the fulfillment process. These patients are sick, they have chronic illnesses. So they need these medications on a month-to-month basis. So we had to make sure that we were the best at the game. And, we had New York as our base, and then we grew 50 states. And, we did very well. We started with 2 employees in 2006, and by 2017, we had over 100 plus. And after that, I basically, I started, I had the technology company, CoPilot Provider Support Services, for many years. But that came as a need by a manufacturer out there, for providing hub services to provide support around the reimbursement and benefits area for the doctors and patients to understand the pharma's drug benefits. And right when we sold CareMed, I took a little break and I became very bored, and I thought I needed to do something more. And then I started pretty much growing that business. And it's unfortunate to be living in the times we are, especially around COVID. The world's been dramatically affected by it, but everybody in this whole, needs to adjust themselves. And one of the ways that we didn't know what was going to happen, right? We were running a company and we had employees. There was lockdowns in the United States. As you know, the lockdown was much harsher than even Pakistan, and the effect of COVID was much greater. So one of the things that we had to decide for ourselves was to make people work remotely. And this whole idea of remote working was a nerve-wracking one. You don't know how the productivity level is going to be. You have HIPAA, you have all this patient data sensitivities. But to our surprise, it worked very well. I think the pandemic taught us many lessons, and a lot of them were positive. And I think because of the pandemic, a lot of tech is at play, which is amazing. I think we accelerated ourselves by maybe a decade plus, because there's been a heavy investment in technology. Technology has been used more as a gateway to getting services fulfilled and information out there. So for us, the manufacturers were relying on the digital strategy more than ever, and the growth had been phenomenal. And that created a move to Florida, which Florida was the only one of the very few states which was still open for business as respect to New York. So the move had been pretty good. We moved to the Orlando region. We hired a number of employees for new programs by new manufacturers that came on board. And as a result, we're also keeping in mind for a lot of expansion. So here we are, and Bilal, thank you so much for having me here.
Right. It was a pleasure listening to all that, and it does seem that that you've been rewarded with the fruits of your labor, with all these different progressions that you made. And as somebody who's been following this space quite closely, I'd like to ask in regards to certain increases of drug prices in the States, because I do realize that unlike Pakistan, which is heavily controlled, whose pharmaceutical industry is heavily controlled by the government in its registration and pricing, that pricing is done on a very arbitrary level in the States, on the private scheme of things. So
the way my specialty pharmacy worked was we had limited distribution access with the manufacturers to provide some of these specialty products. One, they are very expensive in nature. Second, the work that's revolved around getting these drugs to the patients is quite a challenging one. So you really had to demonstrate the capabilities out there. Now, it's interesting. The United States, this may be a personal bias, but the United States is puts up the money for research for the rest of the world, because as you see that, the drug pricing in the US, as long as you have an FDA approved drugs, the pharmaceutical companies can price these drugs at whatever price they wish. And then you have Medicare, which is the biggest spend for patients which are 65 and over, and most of that is government subsidized. They have to pay for it. In Congress, there's a bill which had passed many years ago called the non-interference clause. Basically, as long as pharma has a drug out there, they're right to price their products however they want, and the government most likely 99.9% of the time will pay for it as long as there's clinical efficacy in the product. And if FDA is approving it, so that's the answer. To go back to the drug pricing, from my experience, so I was in that space for 10 plus years. There was a drug, Revlimid, you could take, for example, or many of the drugs out there. They were increasing their prices by about 10 to 12, 15% every year by year. And that's how these pharma companies were making their revenues, their public numbers, and, demonstrating. But at the same time, they can argue that because of that, they were able to provide and treat all these patients.
Right, that's quite elaborate. And so you said that the basic premise of a specialty pharmacy is to provide medicines for it's what I'd like to term as, I'd say, either rare diseases or diseases that require biologics to be formulated. So what were like some of the most like common diseases that you were providing medicines for? Was sickle cell anemia one of them? Was Hodgkin's disease one of them? What kind of diseases patients would you normally treat?
Yeah. So oncology, multiple myeloma was like my biggest disease area that we were servicing. And then I think after that, it was multiple sclerosis. And then we were also dealing with a lot of the Hep C, hepatitis C. Now, it's interesting where you look at a Gilead product, Hervoni and Sovaldi here in the US, which is, as you know, Bilal, is a cure to hepatitis C. It's $84,000 a cocktail. I think in Pakistan it's $5,000 or some numbers like that, right? So, and it's the same product, essentially. It's the same company on the distribution side. But as far as the diseases, we were covering oncology, MS, we were in the hepatitis C space, and then we were into all the other osteoarthritis and, prostate and these other disease categories as well. But just to say, like, our partnerships with some of these companies, taking Celgene, for example, we were processing $70 million just on that one, with that one company, or a handful of drugs like Revlimid, thalidomide, so forth. And that was a blockbuster drug for multiple myeloma.
That's quite interesting. So tell us about how you then managed to exit successfully from CareMed and what prompted you to make the move.
Well, it was hard to part ways. I actually didn't want to sell. However, as an entrepreneur, when you're running business, at the beginning it's very personal, right? When you first start your business, I was basically everything. I was the driver, I was the finance guy, I was the tech guy, and you build this personal affinity with your business, and it's like your baby and you don't want to let it go. That being said, you also have to understand the challenges you're dealing with in the marketplace. Number one, you're in the US, you're basically playing in a very high regulatory environment. So you have to keep that in mind, right? Like the stress around that and keeping that engaged. And especially if you're having like substantial growth, we went from doing literally in the single digits, millions of dollars to over $300 million US worth of business over 10 years. So the pressure becomes very different. But the other, headwinds in the business also are things which materially impact you, are basically insurance companies cutting down reimbursement rates year by year. And when you're already working on a few percentage points, those things hurt you. And then you're also in the middle of like dealing with the large conglomerates out there which are competing with you for your business. It's a little difficult to explain, and maybe people won't understand this, but the pharmacy benefit companies, which are supposed to be intermediary to the insurance companies and to the pharmacies themselves, they were in play. They're the largest tech plays out there, which are supposed to help insurance companies save on the drug spend. But what they've done is they have also opened up their own specialty pharmacies, and they're also your client. So in their kind of idea, there's nothing better for them to like cut off your contract when you're doing a lot of business and keep all that business in-house and go show the insurance company, look, we saved you a lot of money, especially since they also do the rebates with the drug manufacturers. So I just think that the time we exited, because there was a lot of consolidation going in the market, and a lot of companies were being bought out, I think we hit the exit at the right time, even though I ideally wouldn't have wanted to.
I guess I know where you're coming from, because right there, I mean, every entrepreneur and every successful entrepreneur that does really come from a place of humility, but it's not really a place that he's ashamed of admitting. It's like even when I started out, I was really hands on with everything, and I guess when things sort of become more streamlined, there is that sense of some of your hold on the business being taken away. But I guess that's just is human nature, right? It's like there's something apart from like what's written on paper that actually makes you stick to a company or an idea, and then further on, even if your business improves tenfold or 20-fold, if your heart's not in it, I guess then maybe that's one reason one has to part ways. Or maybe if somebody sees a better opportunity somewhere else, then that's also another reason. There's multiple reasons for people to just not exactly abandon ship, but to exit. And the important thing, I think, is to exit with a level of grace and with a minimal level of regret as well. So how are things going now at CoPilot? I never got the chance to actually talk to you about it in detail. And so what does it do, and what's your role in the whole venture?
Sure. So at CoPilot, I'm the chief executive officer. I'm also a co-founder, along with my partner Moby Cosme. We basically, as I mentioned before, Bilal, this was more like when I was running my specialty pharmacy. I understood certain other challenges with mid-tier manufacturers were having in the marketplace. Look, your tier one drugs will always sell. You don't really require any handholding. They're blockbuster. Everybody understands them, and they're out there pretty much selling. But areas where people or manufacturers need assistance is, I guess, like with these mid-market companies out there that may have challenges around doctors understanding their reimbursement or benefit component, and they need basically a technology solution that can help with that technology and expertise. So CoPilot is a benefit provider, basically assisting manufacturers with getting their doctors and patients on the understanding around the benefits component. So a patient walks into a doctor's office with a say Aetna insurance, and they need to understand what the benefit looks like around the particular drug and the related to that insurance. We provide that. We have a proprietary engine which provides that service the same day and gets it back out to the doctor. And the manufacturer pretty much sponsors these programs. And I can tell you that my competitors out there are doing some of this work in like 4 or 5 days. And because of the use of the technology and I think the way the operational workflow is set up, I think we've been able to achieve A, economies of scale, and B, provide an excellent service out there which is unmatchable in the industry.
It's quite elaborate in the work you're doing, and I take it this is essentially for OPD medicines, right? Or do you do IPD as well?
It's basically for well, again, these services are being provided to manufacturers with very complex diseases, be with higher price points, because look, for you have a drug out there for $50, they're not able to provide an external resource to run benefits processes and etc. But we're working with manufacturers a lot on the in different disease categories, but more expensive in nature. And a lot of these drugs are also being covered under the medical benefits. So we're helping the doctors understand the medical benefits, because the doctors typically under that process need to buy and bill the prescription, and these prescriptions basically are very expensive. And if a doctor puts out the money and somehow the insurance company rejects the claim, they'll be out of pocket.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, like you mentioned before, it's what you're doing is essentially bridging the gap between the manufacturers and the insurance companies, and you're also giving a platform that's easy to use and understand by, I guess, all stakeholders within that healthcare ecosystem. So that's, I think,
you got that.
Something that essentially needs to be developed quite a bit in Pakistan, because you do have insurance companies over here, and you do have manufacturers that are producing at quite a high rate. I mean, the pharmaceutical industry is increasing, somewhere between 7 and 12% year on year, and more drugs are set to be developed in the market. But the thing is that you can only go so far as to provide maybe patient care programs under certain manufacturers over here, which are essentially targeted towards lower income groups. Whereas, there's still a lot of medicines, like, for example, there is no local manufacturer essentially making medicine for multiple sclerosis or for benign prostate hypertrophy or for other specialty diseases for which, a non-objection certificate has to be generated from the government for that customer to get it imported in Pakistan for him. But then again, right, like I mentioned before, government slapped a 70% GST on the import of raw materials for pharmaceuticals, despite the fact that medicines themselves don't carry any general sales tax in the country. So I do feel that margin being sliced means that there's going to be even higher barriers for entry for people who want to make a difference in this space, which is already being squeezed quite a bit by the fact that there's a lot of government regulation and government control on pricing over here, which naturally, price changes have been more common in the past year, but that's also because inflation is also increasing quite a bit. The price of the raw materials in all stages of manufacturing have gone up. So it was very nice chatting with you, Nuaman, and I just wanted to pose one last question to you.
Sure.
What message would you like to send budding tech entrepreneurs out there, and what advice would you give to people who want to make a difference in this world by going into healthcare?
I think one thing is never give up on your dreams. If you have an idea out there, the only way the idea is going to come to fruition is if you put it into practice. So, just whatever your thoughts are, make sure you follow on them and you try your best. And what was the second part of the question, Paul?
It's about ultimately people want to go into healthcare, especially now with COVID coming about, because they think it's something that'll make them a lot of money. Whereas even you told me, being in the States, your margins were paper thin in your industry.
Right.
But what is the right mindset for somebody who wants to go in healthcare, especially in pharmaceuticals or pharmacy? Like, what should his main aim be?
I'll tell you one thing. If you're thinking about getting into the pharmacy business because of COVID, I don't think that's the right approach. I think the right approach should be, because COVID will eventually take its own course, or disappear at some point or another. But I think the right approach should be, the ability to have an understanding of what you will do in this sector. And I think being niche is better than just opening up a traditional pharmacy because they're a dime a dozen. So having an angle or perspective on what area of healthcare you want to get involved with is kind of important. And then more importantly, you have to get into any healthcare business, I think, with the idea of like helping patients. The patient comes before anything out there. And if you put the patient first, you will naturally evolve as a entrepreneur and as a business. I think you'll do very well.
Very well said. Thank you once again for coming on the show, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Take care. Bye-bye.